The second time I watched my patent being stolen, I was standing behind a glass wall in the Innovation Center, holding a prototype no bigger than a matchbox and listening to my best friend practice my speech with my name cut out of it. The first time, I had mistaken the sound for nervousness. I had stood in that same hallway with my stomach tight and my palms sweating against the little velvet case, telling myself that Amara was only rehearsing because she loved the invention as much as I did, because we had spent 2 years in the same lab breathing the same solder smoke, because she had seen me fall asleep on top of circuit diagrams and wake up with copper dust on my cheeks. In that first life, I had stepped forward with a smile and let her hug me before the investor showcase began. She had smelled of expensive jasmine perfume and panic. She had pressed her mouth to my ear and whispered, "Let me introduce it first. You freeze when people stare. I'll make them love it, then I'll pass the microphone to you." I had believed her. 20 minutes later, she walked onto the stage under violet lights, lifted my prototype in both hands, and said, "For the last 3 years, I have dedicated my life to solving thermal collapse in micro-storage devices."
Not we. Not my team.
Not Nova Vale, the woman who had designed every layer of the self-healing membrane and filed the first confidential disclosure 6 months before Amara even joined the lab. I remembered the applause like a physical wound. I remembered Professor Hovel lowering his eyes. I remembered my father, seated in the front row beside the university chancellor, clapping because he did not yet understand that his daughter had just been erased. I remembered running to the patent office, trembling and stupid and armed with notebooks I thought would save me, only to discover that Amara had already filed an application under her own name, supported by scans of pages she had stolen from my locked drawer and altered with a hand so careful the examiner questioned me instead. I remembered the lawsuit that emptied my savings, the investigation that moved slower than grief, the investors who dropped me, the news article that called me a disgruntled lab assistant, the night I walked out of my apartment after reading that Amara's patent had been approved and did not look both ways before crossing the street. But this time, when I heard her rehearsing my invention into becoming hers, I did not move. I stayed behind the glass, looked at the reflection of my own calm face, and checked the time. 8:42 a.m. The fraud file at the National Intellectual Property Office had been opened 16 minutes earlier. Amara's voice floated through the cracked rehearsal room door, warm and certain, the way people sound when they have never been punished for taking what belongs to them. Our device uses a layered ionic lattice to prevent catastrophic thermal runaway while increasing charge retention under pressure, she said, pausing exactly where I had written the pause in my own script. This is not merely a safer storage cell. It is the missing bridge between wearable medical devices, disaster response sensors, and aerospace-grade micro-power. She smiled at her reflection in the black screen of the wall monitor, tilting her chin the way a founder does before a photograph. Beside her, my former graduate supervisor, Dr. Renwick, adjusted his tie and said, "Good. Say my device, though. Investors like ownership." That sentence made something inside me go very still. In my first life, I had spent months wondering how Amara had filed so quickly, how she had known which claims mattered, how she had convinced the licensing office to ignore my disclosure record. I had blamed her alone because betrayal is easier to understand when it has one face. Rebirth gave me the ugliest gift, memory with context. I knew now that Renwick had not been passive. He had been building a clean path for her since the first patentability meeting, nudging me to leave blank spaces in my lab book because formal language could come later, pushing me to send raw diagrams to his personal email because the university server was slow, praising my caution in private while telling the technology transfer director I was brilliant but unstable. He had wanted the patent to sit under Amara's name because Amara's uncle chaired Helix Meridian, the venture fund funding half the faculty's projects, and Renwick wanted a directorship after retirement. In my first life, I had not seen the machine until it had crushed me. In this life, I had woken 97 days before the showcase with a bruise on my shoulder from a death that had not yet happened, and I had stopped being a girl begging the truth to defend itself. I became meticulous. I recreated my original timeline, identified every stolen document, then fed Amara and Renwick exactly the evidence they expected to steal, every false comfort wrapped around a trap. The real disclosure was already filed. The complete prototype chain of custody was already notarized. The first confidential drawings were deposited with an independent archive under my name, my father's old patent attorney as witness, and the university's own compliance office copied on a sealed complaint. Most importantly, I had learned that the patent office did not just process applications. It investigated fraud quietly before it ever spoke loudly. At 8:26 that morning, a senior examiner named Helena Zhou had opened case FI 7719, possible inventorship misrepresentation and document fabrication, and the named suspected party on the internal cover sheet was not me. It was Amara Eloan Pierce. I should have felt triumphant, but standing in that corridor, listening to her steal my cadence, all I felt was the strange dull ache of seeing a ghost repeat a murder. Amara had not been born cruel in the obvious way. That was what had made her dangerous. She cried at sad commercials, remembered birthdays, sent voice notes when I worked too late, and once walked across campus in a storm because I had forgotten to eat. She made betrayal feel impossible right up until the second she needed your life more than she needed your friendship. We had met during orientation for the university's Emerging Technologies Fellowship, both of us wearing the same cheap navy blazer from the campus thrift shop, both of us laughing because the sleeves were too short. She told me she came from nothing. I told her I came from a father who repaired elevators and a mother who died before she could see me win anything. In that first year, we shared instant noodles, scholarship panic, and a belief that talent could build a door where no one had left one. But Amara had one talent I did not understand until too late. She could find the soft hinge in every person and press until the door opened. With me, it was loneliness. With Renwick, it was ambition. With the Chancellor, it was donor money. With my father, it was gratitude. She called him Mr. Vale and asked him questions about the old factory lifts, and he glowed because brilliant young people rarely treated repairmen like historians. In my first life, after the patent was stolen, my father still invited her to dinner because he thought she had been caught in a misunderstanding. By the time he realized the truth, his hair had gone white around the temples, and his workshop was mortgaged to fund my legal fight. In this life, I had told him earlier, not everything, not the impossible truth of rebirth, but enough. I showed him the copied files. I showed him the altered scans. I showed him the hidden camera footage from my lab drawer, the one I installed behind a dead smoke detector after waking up again. He watched Amara open the drawer at 2:13 a.m., photograph my notebook, and put everything back exactly as it was. He did not speak for a full minute. Then he asked, "What do you need me to do?" That was when I knew this life would not end under headlights. The first phase of revenge was not dramatic. It was paperwork, and that was why Amara never saw it coming. People who steal inventions imagine genius as a spark, something that happens in a white-hot moment and can be claimed by whoever holds it under the brightest light. They do not understand that ownership is a trail.
Dates, drafts,
Witness signatures, version histories, materials orders, failed experiments. The ugly photograph of prototype 3 after it smoked and melted through a ceramic tray. The email to a supplier asking whether their polymer binder could survive 72 hours at 60 degrees. The receipt for a microscope lens bought with rent money. The voice memo recorded at 3:04 a.m. because I realized the dendrite problem was not the cathode, it was the compression boundary. In my first life, I had all of that scattered across devices and notebooks, but scattered truth is weak when a thief arrives with a polished lie. In this life, I built a cathedral out of evidence. Every experiment was duplicated across encrypted drives. Every notebook page was signed by 2 witnesses and scanned the same day. Every code commit was pushed to a private repository monitored by an outside counsel. I filed a provisional application before Amara touched the final prototype, then filed a supplemental technical disclosure that described features she did not even know existed. When she stole the visible version, she stole the decoy, functional enough to dazzle investors, incomplete enough to betray anyone who claimed to understand it. The real innovation, the part that made the membrane self-repair under microfracture stress, was hidden in a calibration routine she believed was a manufacturing flaw because I had let her hear me complain about it. That little routine became the key. In the decoy files, I labeled it stability error. In the sealed filing, I labeled it adaptive fracture response. When Amara copied the documents and tried to sound clever, she described my central invention as a problem I had failed to solve. Patent fraud, it turns out, is not only taking what does not belong to you. Sometimes it is proving under oath that you do not even know what you stole. At 9 o'clock, the Innovation Center began to fill with money. You can always tell when investors enter a university building because the air changes. Professors stop walking like exhausted teachers and start walking like founders. Students pull their lanyards straight. Administrators appear from nowhere with clipboards and smiles. The security guards at the doors stand taller, not because venture capitalists are royalty, but because universities often act as if they are. I stood near the registration table in a cream suit my mother would have loved, the Matchbox prototype resting in a velvet-lined case against my palm. Across the atrium, Amara emerged from the rehearsal room wearing a white dress sharp enough to cut paper. Renwick walked behind her, laughing at something she said, his hand hovering at her shoulder like a mentor proud of his chosen heir. When she saw me, her expression softened into that familiar performance of relief. "Nova," she said, crossing the marble floor with both hands extended. "There you are. I was worried. You didn't answer my messages this morning." In my first life, I had apologized. I had said the showcase nerves made me sick. I had let her take my hands. This time, I smiled. I was finishing one last check. Her eyes flicked to the case. A flash of hunger crossed her face so quickly that anyone else would have missed it. I did not. "You brought the cell?" she asked. "Of course." "Good," she said, and lowered her voice. "Listen, I know we said you'd open the presentation, but Renwick thinks it would be smoother if I frame the market problem first. You can come in for the technical explanation after. You know I'm better with crowds." She squeezed my fingers, exactly like before. "This is our day. Don't let ego ruin the flow." The cruelty of that sentence almost made me laugh.
Ego.
The word thieves use when the owner objects. I looked over her shoulder at the balcony, where a woman in a charcoal suit had just arrived with a plain black folder tucked beneath one arm. Helena Zhou did not look like an executioner. She looked like someone who had spent 20 years reading claims too carefully to be impressed by stage lighting. She met my eyes once, then looked away. I said, "You're right. You should go first." Amara's smile bloomed. She thought she had won the morning before the battle began. My father arrived at 9:17, wearing his good jacket and the expression of a man who had tightened every bolt in his heart so nothing loose could rattle. He had never enjoyed academic events. In my childhood, he attended science fairs with oil under his nails and stood at the back because other parents had degrees and polished shoes. My mother used to drag him forward and whisper, "Our daughter built the volcano, Eli. Stand where she can see you." After she died, he forgot how to stand where anyone could see him. In my first life, I had watched him clap for Amara because he believed he was clapping for me. That memory had kept me awake more nights than the lawsuit. This time, I met him near the coffee station and fixed his crooked collar with fingers that shook only once. "You don't have to stay for all of it," I said. He looked at me as if I had insulted him. "I am staying until every person in this room knows who made that thing." His voice was quiet. "And after that, I am taking you to lunch." I wanted to cry then. Not when Amara stole the speech. Not when Renwick lied.
Then.
Because revenge had given me back ordinary things I had not known were sacred. Lunch with my father, his jacket smelling faintly of machine oil, his rough thumb brushing a speck of lint from my sleeve. At the edge of the atrium, Amara watched us with a softness that almost fooled me. Almost. She had always understood the value of witnesses who loved you. In the first life, she used my father's affection as cover, telling the press, "Mr. Vale knows how much I cared about Nova." This has destroyed me too. In this life, he was not cover. He was the one who had signed the affidavit confirming he saw my earliest prototype on our kitchen table 17 months before Amara's claimed conception date. A father's memory, witnessed and notarized, is not enough to win a patent fight alone. but it is enough to make a lie bleed. The showcase opened with a speech from Chancellor Maris, a silver-haired man whose talent was turning other people's labor into institutional pride. He spoke about innovation, courage, women in science, the importance of ethical entrepreneurship, and the university's commitment to protecting the originality of student work. The last phrase rolled through the atrium so smoothly that several faculty members nodded, as if they had not spent years ignoring complaints from students without powerful families. I watched Renwick's mouth twitch. He had no idea those words had been added to the opening remarks at the request of the compliance office. The first two teams presented a biodegradable sensor and a modular greenhouse drone. People clapped, asked questions, exchanged cards. Then the lights shifted to violet, the large screen behind the stage filled with the title slide I had designed, and my stomach remembered dying. Lumen Cell, self-stabilizing micro-storage for critical devices. Under the title, where my name had been in the first draft, there now stood Inventor and Lead Developer, Amara Eloan Pierce. University Advisor, Dr. Malcolm Renwick. The room applauded. My father's hand tightened around the program until the paper bent. Amara walked onto the stage with my velvet case in her hands, because 5 minutes earlier she had asked to hold it for the entrance, and I had handed it over without protest. She stood under the lights, radiant with theft, and began. When I was 16, she said, my mother's portable heart monitor failed during a storm. I blinked. That was new. In my first life, she had opened with market numbers. This time, she had added tragedy. Her mother had never used a heart monitor. Her mother taught Pilates in a lakeside suburb and considered storms relaxing. But the lie worked. The room softened. Amara let her lashes lower. Since then, I have asked one question. What would it mean if the smallest devices could be trusted when life was at its most fragile? She lifted the prototype. This is my answer. A murmur moved through the investors. Pattern interruption number 1. The thief had improved her performance. Pattern interruption number 2. I was not worried. Amara's presentation was beautiful. That was the part one hated most. She did not stumble. She did not overreach too early. She explained the problem with lithium microcells in language simple enough for donors and precise enough to flatter engineers. She clicked through slides showing thermal maps, pressure testing, fatigue cycles, and field applications. Half the images were mine. 3 were decoys. One was a trap, so elegant I had named it after my mother. It showed a cross-section of the membrane with 7 layers, the third marked as a passive spacer. In the real invention, that layer was active, loaded with micro-encapsulated electrolyte gates that opened under stress. In the stolen files, I had altered the diagram after installing the hidden camera, making the active layer look inert. No honest inventor would describe it that way because no honest inventor who built the device could misunderstand the layer responsible for half its function. Amara reached that slide and said, the passive spacer is the simplest part of the design, but sometimes simplicity is what makes an invention scalable. Helena Zhou, seated 3 rows from the back, wrote something in her folder. Renwick smiled with visible pride. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then Amara clicked to the next slide, and my breath stopped.
It was not mine.
The data table showed performance numbers from the final prototype, the real one, the one I had not placed in the decoy folder. For 1 second, the room seemed to tilt. She had found another source. A backup. A leak I had missed. My hands went cold. On stage, Amara's smile sharpened. As you can see, Lumen Cell maintains 94% retention after high compression cycling, she said. That number was real. Too real. My father looked at me, and I kept my face still because the second rule of surviving a trap is never letting the trapped person know which wire matters. But inside, my mind ran backward through every access point. The lab server? Renwick's email? The manufacturer? Then I saw the footnote in tiny gray text at the bottom of the slide. Test Batch 9C, witnessed by MR. My panic cooled into understanding. Renwick had stolen from his own copy of the sealed faculty review packet. He had access to one true table but not the explanation behind it. A dangerous surprise, yes. A fatal one, no. The fraud file had just gained a second named suspect. The first investor question came from a man with a watch more expensive than my father's workshop. Miss Pierce, impressive work. Can you explain how the cell maintains retention under compression without triggering thermal instability? Amara smiled like a knife being polished. Certainly. The key is in balancing the ionic flow through the stabilizing lattice while preventing fracture propagation. It sounded good. It meant little. The investor leaned forward. More specifically, what mechanism activates after microfracture? There it was, the door between memorization and invention. In my first life, no one had asked that question. They had been too dazzled, too eager, too willing to treat a confident woman on stage as evidence of her own brilliance because it made a better funding story. In this life, the question had been planted by someone who had read the sealed complaint. Not scripted, not illegal, just informed. Amara's eyes flicked to Renwick. He gave the smallest nod. The spacer layer absorbs mechanical stress, she said. That delays fracture propagation. The investor frowned. Absorbs how? She laughed lightly. Through the polymer density gradient. Helena wrote again. Across the aisle, the university's technology transfer director, Miss Solon, stopped smiling. Because in my original disclosure, the polymer density gradient was listed as a failed early approach. It did not work. It never had. It produced exactly the kind of heat spike the invention was designed to prevent. Amara had just described a dead prototype as the heart of a living patent. Pattern interruption number 3. The room did not realize the lie yet, but the people who mattered did. I looked at Renwick. For the first time, his expression tightened. He understood that technical questions could expose the gap, but he still believed the stage belonged to him. He rose smoothly from his chair and said, "If I may add, the breakthrough is proprietary and subject to an active patent filing, so we must be careful not to disclose claims-sensitive mechanisms." Beautiful. Cowardly. Effective. The investor sat back. Amara recovered. The applause returned. But Helena Jo closed her folder, and that small sound was louder to me than the clapping. After the presentation, the showcase shifted into the private demonstration hour. This was where money became intimate. Investors moved from table to table, touching prototypes, asking about equity, calculating how much of a young inventor's future could be purchased before she learned what it was worth. Amara stood behind the lumen cell display with Renwick on one side and Chancellor Maris on the other, a perfect triangle of ambition. My name did not appear anywhere on the banner. I stood 10 feet away, officially listed as research support, wearing a badge Amara had printed for me herself. In the first life, that badge had humiliated me so badly, I hid it under my blazer. In this life, I left it visible because humiliation can become evidence if you let the right people see it. Ms. Solon approached the table with 2 legal council members behind her. "Amara," she said pleasantly, "before we bring Helix Meridian through, we need the inventor certification form signed for the licensing packet." Renwick relaxed. This was supposed to happen. It had happened in my first life too, in a side room, without scrutiny, while I stood outside wondering why no one had called me in. Amara picked up the pen. "Of course." Solon placed the form before her. "Please read the declaration aloud before signing." New compliance policy. Renwick's eyes snapped to her face. "Since when?" "Since this morning," Solon said. Her smile did not move. The declaration was standard, but spoken aloud it sounded like a curse. "I certify that I am the original inventor of the claimed subject matter, that I have not knowingly omitted any co-inventor, that all submitted notebooks, diagrams, data tables, and statements are true to the best of my knowledge, and that any intentional misrepresentation may result in disciplinary action, loss of licensing rights, referral to the National Intellectual Property Office, and civil or criminal penalties where applicable." Amara's fingers tightened around the pen. Only for a second. Then she looked straight at me and smiled. "I certify," she said, clear enough for the nearby microphone to capture.
She signed.
Renwick signed as witness. Chancellor Maris signed as institutional representative. The trap did not close with a shout. It closed with ink. Helix Meridian arrived at 10:34 with cameras, assistants, and the smell of expensive impatience. Amara's uncle, Dorian Pierce, wore a charcoal suit and the benevolent expression of a man who liked being thanked before he paid. In my first life, he had announced a conditional $5 million seed commitment that turned Amara from campus inventor into national headline before my complaint even made it out of intake. By the time investigators looked at my evidence, the story had already hardened around her. Nobody wanted the embarrassment of admitting they had funded a fraud, so they treated me as the problem instead. This time, I had understood something my younger self had not. Public lies need public foundations, and if you crack the foundation before the cement dries, the whole structure collapses faster. Dorian embraced Amara for the cameras. "My niece has always been extraordinary," he said. "Our family is proud to support women who build the future." The photographer lifted his camera. Amara leaned into the moment. Renwick gestured for me to move farther from the table. "Nova, could you bring more brochures from the back?" he said, not looking at me. "Of course," I replied. I walked away slowly enough that the camera caught my badge. Research support. Then I turned at the storage room door and watched through the reflection in the glass. Dorian opened a leather folder containing the funding letter. Chancellor Maris began his prepared remarks. Amara held the prototype at chest height like a holy relic. And then the side doors opened. Not dramatically. No police sirens.
No gasps.
Just two university compliance officers, Miss Solon and Helena Zhou, walking together with the calm, brutal coordination of people who had already decided the room would not control the facts. Helena approached the table and said, "Before any licensing or funding documents are executed, the National Intellectual Property Office requires clarification regarding inventorship and submitted materials for application 228841 LC. Amara blinked.
"I'm sorry."
Helena opened the black folder. "This matter is connected to an active fraud inquiry." The photographer lowered his camera. Dorian's smile froze. Pattern interruption number 4. The money arrived just in time to witness the fall. For a moment, nobody spoke. That silence was the true beginning of the punishment. People imagine exposure as noise, but the most devastating revelations begin when a room realizes its script has been taken away. Amara recovered first because she always did. "There must be some confusion," she said with a soft laugh. "Our filing was prepared through university channels." Helena looked at her, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "That is one of the reasons we are here." Renwick stepped forward.
"I'm Dr. Malcolm Renwick, faculty advisor."
"This is highly irregular. If the office has questions, they can be directed to counsel. Interrupting a university showcase is inappropriate." "The office contacted University Council at 8:26 this morning," Helena said. "Council requested that no licensing representations be made until the inventor certification was complete. It is now complete." Ms. Solon's gaze moved to the signed form. Renwick's face changed color. He had believed the declaration was bureaucracy. It was bait. Dorian closed his leather folder. "What exactly is being alleged?" Helena turned one page. "Possible false inventorship declaration, altered laboratory records, misappropriation of confidential technical disclosures, and submission of fabricated supporting documents." The words moved through the atrium like sparks landing on dry paper. Amara's mouth parted. "Fabricated? That's ridiculous. I have notebooks. I have data. I have Dr. Renwick." The last sentence was instinctive, and it damned them both. Helena nodded.
"Yes."
"Dr. Renwick is also referenced in the file." Renwick said, "Referenced how?" "As a source of disputed materials and as a witness to declarations inconsistent with archived records." It was clinical, almost gentle. I watched his hands curl. In my first life, he had spoken about me in that tone during the disciplinary hearing, saying, "Nova has struggled emotionally with the collaborative nature of research." He had made me sound unstable because he knew anger is easier to dismiss than evidence. This time, I had learned to let other people read the evidence for me. Amara looked for me then. Across the table, past the investors, through the shifting wall of faculty and students, her eyes found mine. The first emotion in them was not fear. It was accusation. As if I had broken a rule by defending myself before she finished stealing from me. She moved toward me, the prototype still in her hand. "Nova," she said, voice trembling in a way designed to summon sympathy. Tell them. Tell them we worked on this together. Tell them this is a misunderstanding." There it was, the old leash. In public, she wanted my forgiveness to function as evidence. In the first life, I had said, we did work together, but the invention was mine, and the ambiguity destroyed me. Reporters clipped the first half. Lawyers weaponized the second. Friends said, "It sounds complicated." This time, I did not give her a sentence she could cut in half. I stepped forward, took the second prototype from my pocket, and placed it on the table beside hers. It looked identical from the outside. It was not. "We did not invent this together," I said. My voice carried farther than I expected. "You joined my lab after the first working membrane was tested. You photographed my notebook on March 14th at 2:13 a.m. You accessed my raw diagrams through Dr. Renwick's personal email on April 2nd. You filed an application using altered versions of my pages on May 9th. And 10 minutes ago, you signed a declaration stating under penalty that you were the original inventor." Amara's face strained. Renwick said, "This is defamatory." I looked at him.
No.
"It is index." That word mattered. Indexed meant the evidence was not just mine anymore. It had entered a system with timestamps, case numbers, custodians, and people whose salaries did not depend on pleasing Amara's uncle. I turned to Helena. "Would you like the archive receipt?" She said, "We have it." Simple. Devastating. For the first time in 2 lives, an official did not ask me to prove I was not lying. She had already read the proof. Chancellor Maris tried to save the institution before he tried to save the truth. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion privately," he said, stepping into the center of the circle with both palms raised. "The university takes all concerns seriously, but there is no need to alarm our guests." I almost admired the instinct. A building could be burning, and men like Maris would first check whether the smoke was visible from the donor entrance. Ms. Solon turned to him. "Chancellor, the licensing documents cannot proceed." "I understand that," he said tightly, "but public speculation helps no one." Helena replied, "This is not speculation. The office has issued a hold notice on application 228841 LC and any related continuation or assignment filings, pending investigation." Dorian swore under his breath. One of the investors whispered, "Assignment filings?" Another checked his phone. Money hates uncertainty more than scandal. Amara seemed to understand that the room was slipping away from her because she changed tactics. Tears filled her eyes. So quickly they looked rehearsed by muscle memory. "Nova, why are you doing this?" she whispered. "I know you were hurt when Dr. Renwick chose me to present, but this is cruel. You're going to destroy years of work because you couldn't be the face of it." The words landed near old bruises. Hurt. Chosen. Face. She was rebuilding the first life narrative in real time, painting me as jealous before the facts could settle. For 1 second, I saw how it could work. Some students looked uncertain. A faculty member frowned at me instead of her. The old world wanted its old story back. Then my father stepped forward. He did not shout. He did not perform. He took a folded affidavit from inside his jacket and placed it beside the prototypes. "I watched my daughter build the first version on our kitchen table before Miss Pierce ever came to our home," he said. "I sign that statement because I am done watching polite people call theft a misunderstanding." His voice cracked on daughter. The room shifted again. Not because a father's love is legal proof, but because lies depend on isolating their target. I was not isolated anymore. Helena asked for the demonstration to continue under controlled observation. That was the moment Amara should have stopped. A smarter thief would have fallen ill, requested counsel, retreated behind procedure. But Amara had survived her whole life by turning pressure into theater, and the stage was still there. "Fine," she said, wiping her eyes. "Let's demonstrate it. Let everyone see whose device works." Renwick whispered, "Amara." She ignored him. Nova has always been brilliant at making people doubt themselves.
She is doing it now.
But science is not gossip. The device works. She lifted the prototype she had taken for me earlier.
My decoy.
My beautiful little witness. Then explain the activation mechanism before the test, Helena said. Amara's jaw tightened. I already did.
For the record, Helena said.
Explain how this prototype prevents thermal runaway after microfracture under compression. The nearby microphone was still live. The whole atrium heard the question. Amara looked at the prototype, then at Renwick. He gave a barely perceptible shake of his head, but it was too late. Dorian was watching. The Chancellor was watching. The students she had dazzled were watching. She could not admit ignorance without surrendering the identity she had just sold. The passive spacer absorbs stress through its density gradient, she repeated. Helena nodded to the university technician. Proceed. The technician placed the decoy cell into the transparent compression chamber. The screen displayed live temperature, retention, and internal resistance. At low pressure, the numbers looked good. Amara's chin rose. At medium pressure, the retention dipped. At high pressure, the thermal lines spiked sharply, exactly as it had in failed prototype 4. A warning light flashed amber. The technician stopped the test. A murmur broke across the room. Amara said, "That's not right." I stepped forward with the real prototype. May I? Helena nodded. I placed my cell into the chamber. Same pressure. Same duration. The temperature rose, then stabilized. Retention held. The internal resistance corrected in a smooth curve. On the screen, a small line of diagnostic text appeared. Adaptive fracture response engaged. The phrase was from my sealed filing, absent from every document Amara stole. Pattern interruption number 5. The invention itself testified. The room erupted, but not into applause. It was worse. Questions hit from every direction. Why are there 2 prototypes? Which one was filed? Who had access? Did the university verify this? Is Helix still investing? Was the data falsified? Chancellor Maris tried to herd people toward the refreshment area, as if pastries could contain a collapsing fraud. Renwick pulled out his phone and began typing with frantic thumbs. Amara stood motionless, staring at the diagnostic phrase on the screen. In her face, I saw not remorse, but calculation failing to load. She could not understand how the object had betrayed her. Objects had always been safe to steal because they did not speak. But I had built my truth into the function. The decoy failed in the exact way her explanation predicted. The real device succeeded in the exact way my filing described. Helena requested both prototypes be sealed as evidence. The technician placed them in separate containers and labeled them under observation. That sound, the click of evidence cases closing, steadied me more than any applause could have. In my first life, I had screamed in a courthouse hallway that the invention would prove me right if someone would just test it properly. Opposing counsel had said, "Miss Vale is emotional." This time, the test came before the narrative hardened. Amara finally looked at me again. "You set me up," she whispered. It was the first honest thing she had said, all morning. I answered quietly enough that only the nearest people heard.
No.
I documented what you chose. Her mouth twisted. You were my friend. The audacity almost broke something in me. I said. That was what made it useful to you. She flinched, but not because she was sorry. She flinched because people heard. The compliance officers escorted us into conference room A, which had glass walls and terrible acoustics, making privacy more symbolic than real. In the first life, private rooms had been where truth went to die. Administrators loved them because they could turn theft into conflict, fraud into miscommunication, coercion into unfortunate interpersonal dynamics. This time, I had agreed to a private room only after Helena stated on the record that the office's inquiry remained active and all statements could be included in the file. Amara sat across from me with mascara drying beneath her eyes. Renwick sat beside her, his phone face down because Ms. Solon had instructed everyone to preserve communications. Chancellor Maris stood near the window, pretending not to panic. Dorian Pierce had joined by speakerphone with his counsel, his earlier warmth replaced by the clipped tone of a man searching for the nearest exit that did not look like retreat. Helena began with dates. Dates are merciless. March 3rd, my archived concept memo. March 18th, my first working low-capacity cell, witnessed by 2 lab technicians. April 6th, my confidential disclosure to Renwick. April 14th, Amara's first recorded access to my drawer after hours. May 9th, Amara's application filed with diagrams matching my disclosure, but with altered annotations. June 2nd, Renwick's faculty review packet containing data later used in Amara's presentation. June 11th, my sealed supplemental filing with adaptive fracture response. Today, Amara's signed declaration. Each date landed like a step down a staircase. Amara interrupted after the drawer footage. I borrowed notes. We share materials all the time. Helena looked at the transcript. The footage shows you photographing pages marked private and replacing them before leaving the lab at 2:19 a.m. Nova gave me the code. The repository records show no authorized access from your account until after the disputed filing. Renwick said, students often collaborate informally. Ms. Solon replied, then why was Miss Vale removed from the inventor line? He had no answer. I watched him discover that vagueness, his favorite weapon, becomes weak when placed beside a timeline. Then came the twist I had not planned. Helena turned to Amara and said, there is also the matter of the prior warning. Amara's head snapped up. Renwick went still. I did not move, but my attention sharpened. Prior warning? Helena removed a separate sheet from the folder. 3 years ago, during the undergraduate design competition at Westbridge Polytechnic, you were named in an internal misconduct report involving unauthorized submission of a teammate's design sketches. The matter was settled privately, but the report was forwarded to the office last month after your current application raised similarity concerns. The room changed temperature. I had known Amara stole from me. I had not known I was not her first. Her tears vanished. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid.
That was sealed, she said.
Not false. Sealed. Dorian's counsel spoke sharply through the phone. My client was a minor participant in a student dispute, and no formal finding was made. Helena replied, the office is aware of the limits of that report. It is relevant because the same intermediary email address appears in both matters. She looked at Renwick. A private account associated with Dr. Malcolm Renwick. Renwick's chair scraped back. Absolutely not. My mind raced. 3 years ago, I had not known Renwick. Amara had. Or someone connected to him had helped bury her first theft. Suddenly the scale of the machine widened. This was not one desperate friend seduced by opportunity. This was a pattern, a grooming of useful thieves by ambitious adults who knew institutions preferred quiet settlements over public rot. I felt sick, then furious in a colder way than before. In my first life, I had died thinking I had been unlucky enough to be betrayed by someone I loved. In my second, I learned I had been selected by people who recognized my isolation as a vulnerability. Pattern interruption number 6. Even my revenge had hidden roots. Renwick denied everything with the offended dignity of a man who had practiced being believed. He claimed the private email was used by many collaborators. He claimed he never reviewed Amara's old matter. He claimed my invention had emerged from a lab environment he created, therefore inventorship was philosophically complex. Philosophically. I almost laughed. When thieves run out of facts, they discover philosophy. Helena let him speak for several minutes, then placed 2 printed emails on the table. One was from my first life, though not literally. In this timeline, I had forced its equivalent to exist by sending Renwick a technical clarification from an account he believed he controlled. The header showed his private email receiving my adaptive fracture notes 2 days before Amara's revised pitch deck incorporated the real retention data. The second email was from him to Amara, shorter and uglier. Use the 9C table, but do not discuss internal trigger. Say spacer if pressed. My father made a sound like he had been struck. Amara stared at Renwick with hatred, so sudden it revealed the alliance beneath the friendship. Renwick said, that is taken out of context. Helena replied, then provide the context. He did not. Chancellor Maris sat down slowly. Universities are excellent at surviving scandals by sacrificing the person closest to the flame. I saw the calculation enter his eyes. Renwick could burn, Amara could burn, perhaps even Helix could be kept at arm's length, but the institution must appear shocked. I decided then that shock would not be enough. Chancellor, I said, when I submitted my first authorship concern 6 weeks ago, your office marked it as interpersonal conflict and forwarded it to Dr. Renwick for resolution. Would you like me to provide that email too? His face hardened. Miss Vale, now is not the time. It is exactly the time, I said. Private rooms are where you buried the first warning. I am not letting you bury mine. Miss Solon closed her eyes briefly, like someone hearing the floor crack under the building. By noon, the showcase had become a scandal with refreshments. No official announcement had been made, but information moves through academic spaces faster than fire because everyone pretends not to gossip while sending messages under tables. Students clustered near the stairwell. Faculty whispered in pairs. Investors left with polite excuses. Helix Meridian issued a temporary pause before anyone asked them to. The university's media office released a statement so empty it could have floated. We are aware of concerns regarding a student innovation project and are cooperating with appropriate review processes. Appropriate. Concerns. Processes. Words designed to turn a knife wound into weather. Meanwhile, Amara sat in a holding office with her counsel on the phone. Renwick was instructed not to contact students, and I was asked whether I would agree to delay public clarification until the university completed an internal review. In my first life, I would have said yes because I wanted to be reasonable. I had worshipped reasonableness. I believed if I behaved fairly, fairness would eventually find me. This time, I understood that silence is not fairness when only one side benefited from the lie. No, I told Miss Solon. The office can conduct its inquiry. The university can conduct its review. But my name's going back on my work today. She looked exhausted. Nova, these things take procedure. No, I said again softer. The theft took procedure. The correction can start with a sentence.
Perhaps she respected that.
Perhaps she feared the evidence. Perhaps she simply knew the institution had lost the moral right to ask patience from the person it failed. At 12:18, the university updated the project page. Lumen Cell, inventor. Nova Elise Vale. Application status. Under review. It was not justice. Not yet. But when my father saw the screen, he covered his mouth and turned away, and I knew a piece of the first life had been unwritten. Amara found me in the old materials lab just after 1. I had gone there because the showcase floor felt too loud, too hungry, too crowded with people who suddenly wanted to tell me they had always suspected something. The lab was almost empty, its benches cleared for summer maintenance, its windows streaked with rain. I stood beside the fume hood where Prototype 2 had failed and remembered being 24, hopeful, and stupid enough to think suffering guaranteed reward. The door opened behind me. I did not turn. You ruined me, Amara said. Her voice was raw now, stripped of stage sweetness.
No, irraplia.
I stopped helping you ruin me. She laughed once, sharp and broken. You think you're so clean? You fed me fake files. You let me sign that form. You watched me walk into it. I turned then. Without the lights, without the white dress glowing, she looked younger. That was another trick of betrayal. Once exposed, the betrayer shrinks until you almost pity them. Almost. I gave you chances, I said. You could have not opened my drawer. You could have not filed the application. You could have not lied on stage. You could have not signed the declaration. Her eyes filled again, but these tears were angry. You don't understand what it's like to need one chance. There it was, the final shelter of people who take, need. As if hunger transfers ownership. As if desperation signs your name on someone else's work. I do understand, I said. I needed this too. The difference is I built it. She stepped closer. Renwick told me you'd waste it. He said you were too timid, that the invention would die in your notebook if someone didn't carry it. The words hit, not because I believed them, but because I remembered being afraid of exactly that. I had been shy. I had hated public speaking. I had delayed filing because I wanted the device perfect. My weaknesses had been real. They had used real things to justify a false theft. Maybe I was timid, I said. Maybe I would have stumbled through the pitch. Maybe investors would have liked you more. None of that made you the inventor. Amara's mouth trembled. I was going to take care of you. In my first life, after the funding announcement, she offered me a junior research role on my own technology. She called it protection. I called it what it was. You were going to keep me close enough to use and low enough to control. She slapped me. The sound cracked across the lab. For half a second, we both froze. Then the door opened wider, and Helena Zhou, who had followed her at a distance with a compliance officer, said, "That will also go in the report." Pattern interruption number 7. Even her violence found a witness. The next week moved like a storm system. The Patent Office issued a formal notice suspending examination of Amara's application and requiring corrected inventorship submissions, original records, and declarations from all named parties. The university placed Renwick on administrative leave. Helix Meridian withdrew its funding letter so quickly the PDF disappeared from their website before lunch. Amara's scholarship board announced a conduct review. The undergraduate report from Westbridge leaked to a journalist, not from me, and the story became larger than Lumen Cell, a pattern of young inventors, powerful mentors, quiet settlements, donor money, and stolen credit polished into opportunity. Reporters called me. I declined most interviews. I had no desire to become an inspirational headline before I had eaten a full meal without shaking. But I gave one statement in writing. Innovation is not only the moment an idea works. It is the record of who carried it through failure. Protect your failures. They may one day prove the success was yours. People loved that line. They shared it under pictures of me I did not recognize. They called me brave, ruthless, brilliant, cold, strategic, vindictive, iconic, difficult. Women are always turned into adjectives when they refuse to disappear. I tried not to read too much. Instead, I returned to the lab with 2 independent witnesses, packed my notebooks, cloned my drives, and moved the project to a temporary secure workspace arranged by my father's old patent attorney. The first time around, I had begged institutions to protect me after the theft. This time, I built protection before I needed it. That difference saved more than my patent. It saved my mind. But revenge stories lie when they end at exposure. Exposure is the loud part. The quiet part is what comes after, when the world expects the harmed person to be satisfied because the thief cried in public. 2 weeks after the showcase, Chancellor Maris invited me to his office. He had replaced his usual donor smile with solemn concern. On the table sat tea, a plate of untouched biscuits, and a draft agreement granting me a university commercialization pathway under enhanced oversight. It sounded generous until I read the equity terms. The university still wanted the majority share. They wanted to convert my stolen invention into their redemption story, with me as the grateful survivor at the center of a campaign about integrity. Nova, Maris said, we have an opportunity to move forward constructively. I looked at the agreement, then at the framed photograph behind him showing him shaking hands with Dorian Pierce at last year's gala. You mean quietly, I said. He sighed. Public conflict can damage the technology's future. So can institutional negligence. His jaw tightened. Be careful. Patent prosecution is expensive. Manufacturing is expensive. Litigation is expensive. Outrage will not build your company. In my first life, that sentence would have frightened me because it was true. Money matters. Infrastructure matters. No inventor survives on moral victory alone. But I had spent 97 days preparing for more than exposure. You're right, I said. That is why I am not signing. I placed a different folder on his desk. Inside was a letter of intent from Asterion Medical Devices, a smaller company with fewer headlines but cleaner counsel, offering development funding contingent on independent ownership verification. Beside it was a pro bono litigation support agreement from an inventor advocacy clinic whose director had read the fraud file summary and requested a meeting. Maris stared at the documents. You went outside the university? The university went outside ethics, I said. I followed. Pattern interruption number 8. I did not escape one thief to become a mascot for another. Amara's downfall did not happen all at once, which made it more satisfying in a way I did not expect. Public humiliation fades. Consequences with paperwork endure. Her application was not merely paused. It became evidence. Her signed declaration became a problem no tearful interview could soften. The office required her to explain how she obtained specific diagrams before her claimed conception date. She blamed Renwick. Renwick blamed informal collaboration. The private emails blamed them both. Her lawyer attempted to argue that she believed she was a co-inventor because she contributed to presentation strategy and market framing. Helena's response, which my attorney later summarized for me, was beautifully dry. Marketing language does not constitute conception of claimed subject matter. I wrote that sentence on a sticky note and placed it above my desk. Renwick resigned before the disciplinary hearing concluded, citing health reasons. The university announced policy reforms and hoped nobody noticed that reform is what institutions offer when accountability becomes too expensive. Dorian Pierce claimed Helix had been misled by a rogue academic advisor. Then documents surfaced showing Helix staff had received an early memo listing me as technical originator and asked whether student inventorship optics could be simplified before the funding announcement. Simplified. Another word for erased. By the end of the month, the scandal had too many roots for anyone to pull quietly. Amara sent me one email. Subject line, please. Body. You know Renwick pressured me. You know I was scared. I made mistakes, but you're destroying my entire life. Please tell them I helped. I can accept second inventor. I just need something left. I read it 3 times, not because I was tempted, but because grief sometimes disguises itself as temptation. Then I replied with one sentence, tell the truth without using my name as a ladder. I never heard from her directly again. The final hearing at the National Intellectual Property Office took place in a room nothing like the showcase.
No violet lights.
No investors. No banners about changing the future. Just beige walls, microphones, binders, water glasses, and people whose job was to make language precise enough to carry consequences. I sat beside my attorney with my hands folded around a pen. Across the room, Amara looked thinner, her hair pulled back severely, her face bare of the softness she used to weaponize. Renwick appeared remotely, a gray square on a screen, older than he had any right to look after only 6 weeks. Helena presented the findings with the calm of someone closing a door. The office determined that my archived records, witness statements, raw data, and working prototype established me as the sole inventor of the core lumen cell claims. Amara's application contained material misrepresentations, altered records, and unsupported inventorship declarations. Renwick had facilitated access to confidential materials and provided statements inconsistent with documentary evidence. The disputed application would be voided as to false inventorship and referred for further proceedings. Any corrected filing would proceed only under my name and under independent counsel. When Helena said sole inventor, my body did not know what to do with the words. I had imagined that moment for 2 lives, but imagination had made it cinematic. In reality, it was almost quiet. My attorney touched my arm. My father, seated behind me, exhaled like he had been holding his breath since my mother died. Amara did not cry. She stared at the table. Maybe she was empty. Maybe she was finally honest enough not to perform. Then Helena added, the fraud file will remain associated with Ms. Pierce and Dr. Renwick for future office review. There it was. The title of my second life. The thing I had known while Amara smiled under the lights. She had thought claiming my patent would make her name permanent. She was right, just not in the way she wanted. After the hearing, Amara waited for me near the elevators. My attorney stiffened, but I shook my head. There were security cameras, witnesses, and a version of me that no longer mistook confrontation for danger. Amara looked at the floor between us. Did you know from the beginning, she asked, that the office had a file? Yes. Her lips parted in something like a laugh. So, every time I smiled at you, every time I asked if you were okay, every time I stood next to you, you knew. I knew what you had done, I said. And I waited to see what you would do next. She looked up then, and for the first time, I saw hatred without costume. That's cruel. I thought of the first life, my father selling equipment, my name dragged through articles, my invention praised under her photograph, my body on wet asphalt, the patent certificate arriving 2 days after my funeral. No, I said. Cruel is taking everything from someone and expecting them to remain too kind to keep records. The elevator opened behind her. She did not step in. I did help, she whispered. Not with the invention, I said. With the lesson. Her face crumpled, and I walked past before pity could become another chain. Outside the building, rain had polished the pavement silver. My father waited beneath an umbrella too small for both of us, so we stood shoulder to shoulder and got wet on opposite sides. Lunch, he asked, voice rough. I laughed for the first time that day. Lunch. The word felt like a verdict kinder than justice. There was one more thing I had to do before I could let the case become history. In my first life, I had been so desperate to prove Amara stole the patent that I forgot to ask who had made theft profitable. That mistake cost me years. A thief with no buyer is only a liar with stolen paper. A thief with investors, administrators, mentors, and press releases becomes an institution's preferred version of the truth. So, after the office ruling, when everyone expected me to disappear into relief, I requested every communication connected to the original licensing meeting. The university resisted. Of course it did. First they said the files were privileged, then incomplete, then difficult to retrieve because one administrator had retired and another had transitioned to an external opportunity, which is the kind of phrase institutions use when a person leaves quickly but keeps their portrait on the wall. My attorney filed formal demands. The Inventor Advocacy Clinic prepared a public records complaint for grant-funded correspondence. Asterian's counsel, polite as a scalpel, reminded the university that unresolved ownership contamination could affect future partnerships. Slowly, the emails surfaced. Some were boring. Some were cowardly. A few were worse than I expected. One message from the Technology Transfer Office referred to me as technically central but reputationally low yield. Another asked whether naming Amara as lead inventor would simplify donor alignment. A third, sent by Renwick to Chancellor Maris's deputy, said, Nova's contribution can be acknowledged internally if needed. Public lead should remain AP for funding cohesion. I read that sentence at my kitchen table until the words blurred. Funding cohesion. That was what they called the erasure of a woman who could not offer a donor network. In my first life, they convinced me I had lost because Amara was faster, prettier, louder, luckier. In my second, the paper trail admitted what the room never would. They had seen me. They had measured me. They had chosen to steal from me because they thought I was the cheaper person to harm. My father wanted to sue everyone immediately. He paced the workshop with the fury of a man who had spent decades fixing machines and could not understand why educated people built systems with so many deliberate cracks. They wrote it down, he kept saying. Nova, they wrote it down. I understood the disbelief. Ordinary honest people assume wrongdoing hides. Powerful wrongdoing often documents itself because it has mistaken confidence for immunity. But I also knew litigation could become another cage. In the first life, the lawsuit consumed me until I had no invention left, only a case number and a body made of nerves. This time, I chose differently. We filed targeted actions only where they serve the future. Correction of public records, reimbursement of diverted development funds, sanctions connected to the false filing, and a narrow claim against the university for mishandling protected disclosures. No sprawling war for symbolic victory. No endless arena where Amara could keep standing near me by opposing me. My attorney called it disciplined. I called it refusing to let thieves pick the shape of my life twice. Still, there were nights I woke with arguments in my mouth, imaginary cross-examinations burning behind my eyes. I would go downstairs to the workshop and sit beside the prototypes until the bakery ovens rumbled beneath the floor. The machines helped. They did not care about betrayal. They cared about contact resistance, pressure curves, heat sinks, assembly tolerances. They asked clean questions. Does it work? Why not? Try again. Sometimes survival is not a dramatic vow. Sometimes it is returning to a problem that does not lie to you. The most unexpected consequence came from students I had never met. At first, they sent messages cautiously, as if approaching a bruise. A chemistry candidate whose catalyst design had appeared in her supervisor's grant proposal without her name. A robotics student whose teammate filed a provisional application during winter break. A medical engineering fellow who had been told that wanting written inventorship terms made her uncollegial. Their stories arrived at midnight, at dawn between classes, from campuses I had never visited. Some wanted advice. Some wanted permission to be angry. Some only wanted to tell someone who would not immediately ask whether they had misunderstood. I could not answer everyone personally, but I started a monthly workshop with the advocacy clinic. Notebooks, disclosures, invention assignment clauses, how to document contributions without turning every collaboration into a battlefield. I hated that such a workshop had to exist. I loved that rooms filled anyway. At the first session, a young woman in the back raised her hand and asked, "How do you protect your work without becoming paranoid?" I looked at her and gave the answer I wish someone had given me before Amara learned the shape of my loneliness. "You do not document because you distrust everyone," I said. "You document because memory is fragile, power is uneven, and honest collaborators deserve clarity too." The room went quiet in that particular way people do when a sentence lands where a wound has been. Afterward, the student waited until everyone left and told me her advisor called her difficult. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because I had finally learned to hear that word properly. Difficult often means the door did not stay unlocked. Amara became a cautionary story faster than she became a remorseful person. That disappointed some part of me I did not like admitting still existed. I had imagined that once cornered by undeniable proof, she would experience one clean moment of recognition. Not apology, exactly. I was not naive enough to expect that. But recognition. A visible understanding that the thing she did had not been clever, not necessary, not survival, but harm. Instead, through lawyers and carefully leaked statements, she softened herself into the familiar shape of a young woman manipulated by a senior male professor. There was truth in that version, which made it dangerous. Renwick had manipulated her. He had offered shortcuts, cover, and language. But he had not moved her hand into my drawer. He had not forced her to smile at my father. He had not made her stand beneath violet lights and say my answer, while holding the object I built. I refused to flatten the story into either monster or victim because both versions let her escape the harder truth. She had been pressured, and she had chosen. She had been used, and she had used me. She had wanted a future, and she decided mine was acceptable payment. When a magazine requested a joint reconciliation interview, I laughed so suddenly my operations manager dropped her coffee. The editor wrote that audiences were hungry for healing. I wrote back that audiences could make a sandwich. Healing was not a performance ode to spectators who arrived after the knife was removed. The hardest conversation was not with Amara, Renwick, Maris, or any attorney. It was with the version of myself who had died believing she should have fought louder. For weeks after the settlement, I kept finding her in ordinary places. In the mirror above the workshop sink when I washed flux from my hands. In the reflection of dark windows when I stayed late. In the pause before answering emails from collaborators, when suspicion rose before reason. She was younger than me and older than me at once, exhausted by a life I had technically escaped but emotionally carried. I wanted to tell her that I had fixed it. I wanted to show her the corrected filing, the fund, the lab, the signed agreements, my father laughing downstairs with the engineers over burnt pastries. But some losses do not understand evidence. They only understand grief. So one evening, after everyone left, I opened the original notebook from the first successful membrane test and turned to the page Amara had photographed in both lives. The page was ugly, hurried diagrams, coffee stains, one corner burned by a soldering iron, my handwriting slanting upward because I had been too excited to keep the lines straight. At the bottom, I had written a sentence I did not remember writing. If this works, Mom would tell me to stop apologizing before I speak. I sat there for a long time with my thumb on those words. My mother had been dead for 7 years when I wrote them, but apparently I had still been arguing with her in the margins. That was when I realized the patent was never only about credit. It was about permission. Permission to stand in a room without shrinking. Permission to be named without feeling vain. Permission to protect the work without apologizing for loving it. Amara stole the patent because she wanted the future attached to it. Renwick stole it because he wanted the power attached to it. The university almost stole it again because it wanted the redemption attached to it. But I had nearly surrendered it in both lives because some part of me had been trained to believe that wanting recognition made me less pure. I wrote a new line beneath the old one, dated it, signed it, and scanned it into the archive out of habit. Then I whispered to the dead version of myself, "You are not weak because you trusted them. They were wrong because they used it." For the first time, the lab felt completely mine. A month after that, I visited my mother's grave with the first clean production sample in my coat pocket. It was not sentimental in the way movies make such things sentimental. The grass was damp, my shoes sank into the mud, and someone nearby was using a leaf blower so loudly that I had to laugh before I could cry. I told her about the patent, about father pretending not to brag to strangers, about the young inventors who now came to our workshop carrying notebooks like shields. I did not tell her I had died once. Some truths are too heavy for graves. Instead, I placed the little silver cell against the stone for a moment and said, "I stopped apologizing." The wind moved through the cemetery trees, ordinary and indifferent, and somehow that felt like an answer. Life does not pause for vindication. It keeps asking what you will build now that the door is open. The university eventually settled the narrow claims without admitting wrongdoing, which is how institutions apologize when their lawyers are in the room. The settlement paid for our first independent safety lab, 3 research fellowships under my company, and an annual student inventorship fund administered outside the university's control. I insisted on the last part. Maris hated it. That made me confident it mattered. At the signing, he offered me a careful handshake and said, "I hope we can view this as a step toward rebuilding trust." I looked at his hand for 1 second too long before taking it. "Trust is not rebuilt by the person who broke it deciding the construction is finished," I said. His smile faltered. Good. I had spent too much of my first life making powerful people comfortable while they harmed me. Afterward, Miss Solon caught me near the elevators. She looked older than she had on showcase day, but lighter too. "For what it's worth," she said, "I should have listened sooner." It would have been easy to punish her with silence. It would also have been easy to absolve her, because she finally helped. I did neither. "Yes," I said. "You should have." She nodded, eyes wet, and that was enough. Not every person who fails you deserves a dramatic confrontation. Some deserve the truth without decoration, then the burden of what they do with it. 6 months later, Lumen Cell received its corrected patent notice under my name. Not Amara's. Not Renwick's. Not the university's campaign slogan.
Mine.
The certificate arrived in a stiff envelope at my new workshop, a converted print studio above a bakery where the walls shook every morning when the ovens started below. I had hired 3 engineers, all better at arguing than flattering, and 1 operations manager who made me eat before investor calls. Asterion funded the first medical device trials without demanding my silence about the scandal. The Inventor Advocacy Clinic used my case to build a public guide for students protecting early-stage research. My father installed the workshop's lift himself, complaining the whole time that modern contractors had no respect for balance. On the day the patent arrived, we placed it on the scarred wooden table beside Prototype 1, the ugly dead version with melted edges, because I wanted the room to remember that invention is not the polished object in the photograph. It is the burned tray, the failed layer, the late invoice. The person who stays after everyone else decides the idea is not glamorous yet. A reporter asked me later whether revenge motivated me. I told her the truth. At first, yes. Revenge got me out of bed. Revenge taught me to label files, install cameras, hire counsel, and smile while a thief walked toward the cliff she built. But revenge was not enough to build a company, repair a relationship with my father, or make the invention work at scale. Revenge was the match. Ownership was the fire I kept. The story people tell now is simple because simple stories travel well. They say I let my best friend claim my patent and watch the office destroy her. They call it brilliant. They call it cold. They call it the perfect trap. They do not mention the 97 mornings I woke before dawn to document what should have been believed, without documentation. They do not mention the grief of discovering that someone who knew your mother's favorite song could still steal the work you built to honor her. They do not mention how hard it is, after betrayal, to let new people into the lab without flinching when they stand near your desk. They do not mention that justice, even when it comes, does not return the first life. It only gives the second one room to breathe. But maybe that is enough. Maybe a second life is not given so you can become merciless. Maybe it is given so you can stop confusing mercy with surrender. On the anniversary of the showcase, I stood on a different stage at a medical technology conference, the real lumen cell projected behind me, my name beneath it in letters large enough for the back row to read. For one heartbeat, the lights felt like the Innovation Center again, violet and hot, and I saw Amara lifting my prototype in a life that no longer owned me. Then the image passed. I looked at the audience, at the young inventors with notebooks on their knees, at my father in the second row pretending he was not crying, and I began the speech Amara had once stolen. When I was 16, I said, "My mother's oxygen concentrator failed during a storm." This time, the tragedy was mine. The invention was mine. The name was mine. And somewhere in a government archive, inside a fraud file she never knew had opened before she touched the microphone, Amara's name remained exactly where she had put it, attached forever to the proof that she tried to steal a future she did not build.